students, and thank you advisors of 10th grade students for playing this video today for them. Just before we get started, a few instructions. At certain points in the video, I'll ask you to pause. I'll stop talking for a couple of seconds, but know that you need to actually pause the video and have the conversation I'm asking you to have, and then restart the video after you've finished. So there's no time limit, it just depends on how you're going. So that's just some information as we get started. Students, today we're going to be talking about preparing for the biology end of course exam. So in this video we're going to talk about what are some things that you can expect as you go into the exam, what are some strategies you should know about as you're preparing, and then finally we'll talk through some different scenarios of prior exams so that you have a good idea about what to expect. So the first thing you need to know is that on the biology EOC there are 3 different types of questions. The first type are scenario and short answer questions, and there's usually about 4 to 5 of these. So what this means is these are questions where they give you a situation, maybe it's an experiment somebody's done, maybe it's something that's happening in the environment, maybe it's a situation where researchers have conducted some tests and got some data. And in response to these, you have to write short answer responses, which means they're somewhere between 3 and 6 sentences depending on what type of short response we're looking for. The completion questions are your simple standard fill in the blank. So maybe it will show you a DNA strand and say, what's the complementary strand to this? Maybe it will ask you how many chromosomes are in the human body. Different things like that. There's only 1 or 2 completion questions, so there's not a lot. And then finally, the third is multiple choice questions. There's 4 answers. You have to select one. It's based on your content knowledge, and there's usually between 30 and 35 multiple choice questions that are available. Alright, so we're going to talk through each of these different types of questions one by one. So the first type are scenario and short answer questions. Even though short answer questions are given related to a scenario, it's important that you recognize that almost 100% of the questions on the biology EOC are in fact tied to a scenario. Even multiple choice questions will come out of some small reading that you've done. These scenarios often model for you exactly how they want you to answer a following short answer question. So what I mean by this is maybe they present you with data from an experiment and the procedure that the researchers used to get that data. Maybe after that, it follows with a short answer question where it asks you to plan a controlled experiment that is similar to the one that was conducted. One thing you should do is use these models to help you when you're planning your experiments or when you're planning a field study or other sorts of scenarios that you're presented with, and do exactly what they did. So list out the numbers that they did, write the similar wording that they did, but what you need to be careful of and remember is that you have to change your variables. You can't just copy down what they wrote because that's not going to get you a correct answer. That's going to be a copying of something else. So you need to think about what are they asking me and how can I substitute what I need to find out into what they have already done. In addition, you can use the bullet points that are presented at the start of each short answer question as a rubric. So there's usually 3 or 4 or 5 bullet points of what you need to include in your short answer. And if you go down that list of things and you say, I included this, I included that, I included that, and you can check off each thing on the bullet points, that means that you've done well and you've included the things you need to include. There are lots of other types of short answer questions, including writing conclusions, which we'll talk about more later, identifying unintended consequences, which means figuring out like what is something that happened that they didn't mean to happen, describing constraints or trade-offs, so problems associated with whatever's happening, describing scientific reasoning for something, which sounds a little scary but really just means like here's some evidence I have from biology class that supports what I'm saying, and finding a technical solution to a problem, which seems kind of weird when we're talking about biology, but really just means what is something related to computers, what is something related to engineering, what is something related to design that I can relate to what's happening here. So you need to be really familiar with these different terms, so we're going to talk through a couple of examples from released EOC exams to help you out. So here's a scenario you could be presented with. Bears are getting into trash cans at campgrounds near the forest. Park rangers plan to trap and relocate these bears to solve a problem. I'd like you to turn and talk with your partner to identify 2 constraints other than costs on trapping and relocating the bears, and identify how this constraint is a limitation. Something you need to be aware of here is that there are 2 questions being asked, so make sure you're answering both. Advisors, if you could just pause the video and facilitate a conversation following this about what the students came up with, and specifically about the language that's being used in this question. Alright, now that you've restarted the video, I'd like you to turn and talk again about what are 2 unintended consequences that might result from relocating the bears. Again, pause the video. After you've had a conversation about this, go ahead and restart it. Alright, and the third question is to design a technological solution to this problem that would prevent having to relocate the bears. Go ahead and turn and talk. Advisors, pause the video, and then have a conversation about the answers that students came up with. Alright, so here are some possible answers that you may have discussed. For constraints, maybe bears might find their way back to the campground. It would be a limitation because they would just have to be relocated again. Maybe the fact that bear traps are really, really big is a constraint. It's a problem because it would require special equipment or lots of people to move them around. You could have come up with lots of different responses. These are just some examples. Unintended consequences. Maybe the bears were harmed or killed during the relocation, or maybe moving a larger predator away might disrupt the food chain. And finally, a technological solution really is just how could this problem be solved. Barriers or fences could be put up. There could be locks put on the trash bins. You know, this is just like what's a solution, but the EOC is saying it in a really weird way. Alright, the second type of question is completion questions. This requires a number, a word, or a short phrase. Some examples of this might be calculate the population density of a given number of organisms in an area. It might ask you about a specific cell structure and what its function is. So what part of the cell is responsible for producing ATP? And you would write mitochondria. You might be asked what % of offspring has a certain characteristic using a monohybrid cross. So now we're going to talk about some strategies for answering this type of question. The first one is read the question so that you can hear what's being asked. Don't just scan it, don't just guess that you know what's going on, really read it. If more than one answer comes to mind, write both sort of on the margin next to the question, and you can come back later and choose the one you want. Make sure that your choice fits in logically and grammatically. If there's like a blank in the sentence, reread the sentence with your choice written in there. If it sounds funny, it's probably not the answer. And most importantly, don't leave the question blank. Even if you have no idea, write down something. Take a guess. You have a lot of knowledge stored up in your brain from this year, and you have a chance of getting it right, even if you guess. Finally, the third type of question is multiple choice questions. You might be asked to choose how reliable or valid an experiment or study is, or how it could be improved. You might be asked content questions about all of this different stuff we've learned this year that I've listed up here on the slide. And some strategies to help you with this are to eliminate wrong or repetitive answers first. If you know something's wrong, just cross it out. Don't go back to it. To carefully think through which answer makes the most sense. So if something just seems super illogical or out of place, it's probably not correct. And to really take your time. You have all day, as much time as you want, to complete this test. So think about it, maybe leave it blank and come back to it. But in the end, if you really can't figure out the answer, take a guess, because putting an answer there is more likely to get you points than totally leaving it blank, which is going to get you 0. Most importantly, you know, on the test day, take care of yourself and don't stress out too much about it. You're going to be fine. You have spent a whole year learning biology and preparing, and it's going to be okay. Make sure you get a lot of sleep, eat well and have breakfast, As we get closer to the test, so coming up here in the month of May, study a little bit each night, review, don't put stuff off to the end, and use resources. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube that can help you if you're confused about something, and as we get closer to the test, we'll be creating an echo page that will include this PowerPoint so you can listen to me talk again, that has a bunch of different resources on it. So from here, with your advisors, they have a packet for you about conclusion writing. So what you're going to do with your class is first read through the different strategies for writing a conclusion, and then there are 2 practice questions, both of which you will turn into your biology teacher on either Thursday or Friday of this week. So you'll be turning that in to either myself or Mr. Kowalski, and we will spend some time in class next week talking about it. But I really would like you, Mr. Kowalski would really like you to utilize this time to really practice writing a solid conclusion based on the information that you've been given and based on the knowledge that you have from this year in class. Make sure you ask your advisors if you have questions. They're very knowledgeable. And if you have things that they can't answer for whatever reason, make a little note to yourself and ask myself or Mr. Kowalski when you see us later this week. Good luck, and enjoy the rest of your day.